This is the new Meilong 6, and I've actually been given this cube to perform a Florian mod. Here's the first impressions before the mod is done. Just looking at this cube right away, it looks very different from the original Meilong 6. That cube was a very square cube, it was 65mm, and outer layer is still bigger than the inner, but it's like less different compared to most 6x6s on the market. Whereas the newer Meilong 6 just has the biggest outer to inner layer ratio I've ever seen in a 6x6, and it looks very similar to like all the stuff that I've been trying to make in OnShape and SolidWorks for the past like 6 years or so. Except that that cube has 9 holes. I'm probably going to do a 9 hole to this one as well. Going into size comparisons, the Meilong 6 is smaller than the Valk 5. It is not only the same size as the Ultron WRM, but it has the same outer layer size. Pretty much not a comparison against other 6x6s. As for turning, this thing quite reminds me of my Meilong 4. Like, the plastic is pretty similar, and but it is a little bit faster than my Meilong 4, and it's like a bit more stable. And I would say this is pretty much more stable than most 6x6 I've known. It's not like really solid, but it doesn't give me the stiff and restricted feel that any cube more stable than this would probably be giving already. The magnets are also pretty weak. Outer 2 layers here are very similar to the Meilong 4, but the inner layers, for some reason, they are very strong, and like turning force for the inners is also much higher. So I'm not too sure if this one will be fixed in a later prototype of this cube. It's definitely a little bit annoying to like play with a very weak second outer and then get to a strong inner when you're transitioning between layers. Of course, since I'm here to Florian mod this cube, I'm going to test the corner cutting. Forward corner cutting is not affected by Florian mod, it's more of a spring thing, but this has probably one of the best forward corner cutting that I've seen. You can go pretty close to 2 QBs without a problem. Reverse corner cutting, it can cut about half or slightly over half, but I do think I need to put a little bit of force into it, so we're going to proceed with the mod right away. When most people think of the Florian mod, they'll probably think about just the holes, and if you misalign like smaller than the hole, you can reverse corner cut. But after a long time of doing this mod a lot and doing lots of cube designs, it's really about overlap. So I'm going to show you where the pieces overlap the most. In this case, when you overlap the corner against the X center, this is the most classic reverse corner cut of them all. Corner against X center. And the 3 biggest points of overlap are firstly the heads of both the pieces, then the back of the X center against the corner stock. The top one of the 2 corner anchors will overlap against the roots. Comparing the 2 corners here, you see the modded corner is rounded on the top here because this is the head overlap. That's part 1, and then part 3 is right here. The corner here is much rounder than the sharp part of the corner base. Notice that I didn't just round the piece straight down. I rounded it in a more triangular fan shape pattern. So like this is now a slanted line, it's not a straight line. I've intentionally blunted the outside a bit more and progressively less when you go in. When you overlap pieces, like the base is where the least overlap happens and the tip is where the most overlap happens. So these 2 are the most important pieces, but the Florian mod also accounts for a third piece type, which is 2 wings. This is what happens when you reverse corner cut. What happens on the opposite side is 2 wings. So with the wings, I just generally follow the same theme. This one is much simpler. I just rounded. So this is the unmodded piece. You can see that there's these 2 straight lines here. Whereas on the modded piece, you can see where the piece is a bit miscolored from the sanding. It goes from the bottom all the way up here, and it's basically less at the bottom, but when you reach this part, I also fan out a little bit. Third thing that you want to round is the back here. So the unmodded piece has a straight line. The modded one is slightly more blunt. Because again, when you overlap 2 wings like that, misalign 1 wing over the other. Obviously the edge of the wing gets it, but you notice that the back of this wing is quite hidden when I put this wing on top. I do have a theory that the Florian holes need to be broken in, and there's still a chance that the cube can reverse corner cut more if more saws are done, or just more deliberate reverse corner cuts. But right now, just looking at how many degrees you can cut, there's actually no real appreciable increase in how much you can like reverse corner cut before the mod. You can still cut slightly past half a piece in some areas, but in some other areas it's just exactly half a piece. The difference, however, is that any misalignment that is smaller than the holes would actually cut really effortlessly. And this also applies to all 5 of the inner holes that are not part of the original Shengshu 5x5 mod by Florian Krishik. But then my OL, PL and double parity AUX will use these holes. The mechanism of the Meilong 6 looks like a cross between the Aoshi WRM and the Meilong 4. It uses the same core as the Aoshi WRM, where instead of the traditional fat core that you find in most even cubes, the Meilong 6 uses the same core with the ribs and it's just as thin as an odd cube's core. This is something that I've already mentioned in the Aoshi WRM video. Another major similarity between the Aoshi WRM and the Meilong 6 is the back of the center, where you can actually see this diagonal stripe pattern that is used to hollow the piece out. Of course, the most obvious difference is that the Meilong 6 does not feature the anti-deforming mag. Overall, its mechanism looks bigger than the Aoshi WRM, mostly because when you delete this mechanism here, they just expanded the internal mechanism to make up the space instead. There are also some pieces that look very similar to the Meilong 4. It's a diagonal trench cut across this piece right here. It's also present on this piece in the Meilong 4. This piece on the Meilong 6 also has that same pattern, where of course one very big difference between the Meilong 4 and the Meilong 6 is that the Meilong 6 has a 4-piece corner design. Roots and the stem is 1 piece and the head splits into 3, whereas the Meilong 4 and also the original version of the Meilong 6 actually has a 3-piece design where the entire piece just splits into 3, like all the way. At first I was quite thrown off by the third layer having much stronger magnets and higher friction than the second, but after some setup and getting used to the cube, it now feels like the 3 layers have progressively higher resistance the more you go inwards, and the difference is quite proportional and not very awkward at all. The size of the cube is quite drastically smaller than other 6x6s. The giant outer layer takes away the awkward grip that comes when the cube is too small, and the only thing that's really harder to do compared to a bigger cube would be slicing the inner layers individually, which I don't even do that much of. Edge insertions during edge pairing and the entirety of the 3x3 stage on this cube is just exactly the same as the Ultron WRM in terms of layer ratio, although in practice the Ultron has faster turning speed and higher plastic quality, but the Meilong 6 is also more stable. Speaking of stability, the Meilong 6 is significantly more stable and solid feeling than the Aoshi WRM. It is a lot slower and also a lot more controllable. So I do think the Aoshi still allows you to do more turns per second with less effort, but the Meilong is more reliable. And the relationship between the Meilong 6 and the Aoshi WRM is similar to that of the Meilong 4 and the Aosu WRM. Both WRM cubes turn faster, corner cut more, and have less effort when you corner cut, but the Meilong cubes are just more stable. Overall, as with any other good cube, sometimes I might perform poorly on it at first, but after getting used to the cube, I pretty much get my normal average, and even without modding, I do think a good setup on the Meilong 6 can potentially beat the Shadow V2 or the Aoshi GTS, just for it being lighter, smaller, or also a lot more stable. But the mod is also a nice touch to make it reverse corner cut a little bit nicer. Against the Aoshi WRM, I would probably have to test both in a competition to get a solid conclusion. For home practice, the WRM still performs better and feels a lot better to turn, but under competition pressure, the Meilong is less likely to flop unexpectedly. The person whom I've actually modded this cube for is none other than Zhang Anyu, holder of multiple past Big Cube ASRs and the current 6x6 Chinese NR, and he says this cube is good, though it's not as good as something like an Aoshi WRM or an MGC, but the reverse corner cutting definitely did improve after the mod. I basically agree with him on that, and my opinion has changed a bit since making the earlier part of this video, even though I'm not much of an MGC user and I'm more of a Shadow V2 M user before switching to the WRM. But after using the Meilong at home for a while and using the WRM in competition settings, I would arrive at the conclusion that the WRM is clearly the superior cube, and so is my modded Shadow V2. The Meilong's overall performance is still in budget territory, but it's still a step forward for the budget 6x6 market. I average around 220 on the Meilong, which isn't as fast as my main or my backup, but it will still probably put up a good fight against the previous generations of 6x6 flagships like the Aoshi GTS or the unmodded Shadow V2.